Hello, my name is Hannah and I'm a teacher from Twinkl. Thanks for joining me for daily reading. This is the first in a series of 5 videos where we'll be looking at a story called The Man Who Bought a Mountain. Each day we'll read a chapter of the story and we'll talk about a reading skill. I'm going to be asking you some questions, so if you'd like to write your answers down, you could get a piece of paper, or you could download the activity sheet in the download in the video description. You could type your answers onto the activity sheet or you could print it out. Today we're going to be talking about how the author structures the story and how they lay out the text on the page. First of all, I'd like you to have a look at this cover. And I'd like you to discuss with someone or just have a think about what it tells you about the book inside. What sort of book do you think this is going to be? Who do you think this is on the front cover? Pause the video now and have a think. Ready? Let's get reading. One. Everyone, stick together. Look out for each other and stay on the trail, please. The path is really rocky and steep. It's mostly uphill from here, but I suppose you'd all guessed that. As the elders say, the longest journey begins with a single step. Yash finished his speech and smiled at the weather-beaten faces looking back at him. He had spoken loudly and clearly to the group of 9 men and women, most of whom shuffled from foot to foot, adjusting huge rucksacks as they listened. "Geez, how old is this kid? 11, muttered one man towards the back. "Actually, I'm 12, Yash gritted his teeth. 12 years living at the base of this mountain, he thought to himself, compared with 12 hours since you got off the plane. A wise voice then echoed in his head. Always be welcoming to friends, but even more welcoming to visitors. He forced another smile, and then fastened his rarely brushed brown hair into a messy knot with a plain elasticated band which he took from his wrist. "Right, follow me. It's a few hours to the base camp. The Jagurdwa Mountain is home to thousands of different species of animals and plants." Yash began his ritual of information and storytelling as he led the trek. He weaved his familiar route through the fields of amaranth crops, up a steep slope and past the Spring of Hope, where clear, cool groundwater pooled gently before tumbling down the mountain rocks. The area around the Spring of Hope always reminded him how much new life came from even the tiniest nooks and crannies on the vast Jagurdwa Mountain. Cracks and crevices along the side of the steep path were home to beetles and spiders, and behind the waterfall a damp, shallow cave served as a perfect hiding place for other small creatures who preferred the darkness. The river that cascaded from here with its streams and pools provided homes for fish and other creatures, and food for people. Some visitors squealed or jumped in fright at the sight of the many animal species living on the mountain slopes, but Yash loved to see them and took pleasure in trying to identify one set of distinguishing features from another. He knew that some animals lived only in this mountain region and nowhere else. The group wound their way along the rocky track which led to the path of yaks. Yash's scratched and faded boots glided deftly over each section of the rough ground. With his right hand he gripped a finely crafted stick made by his grandfather. The tip of it reached shoulder height, and he planted it into the ground with every alternate footstep. Yash knew this and every path up the mountain like the back of his hand, and he adored every inch of the familiar landscape. Behind him trudged the group, each kitted out with walking boots and hats and weighed down with their heavy bags. Sometimes they marched silently as though they had been sent as a punishment. Thankfully, this lot seemed like a fairly interesting bunch. Several hours and 2 short stops later, he had delivered most of his repertoire. "Some people believe that the mountains were created by the gods. They point up to the skies, see?" Yash extended an arm towards the nearby peaks that were visible around them as they climbed. "Lots of our people believe that they're sacred and a way for us to get closer to the gods." With that, he showed a final flourish of energy, dashing to greet his uncle Ranj as they arrived at their destination. At eye level, the sight was little more than a colourful array of dome-shaped tents pitched on some flat, rocky ground. It looked like alien pods had landed on a moonscape. Above was the most breathtaking view, the one which always drew gasps from the visitors when they first rounded the corner approaching base camp. All around, jagged mountain peaks pointed skyward, stretching their cold fingers towards the clouds. Straight ahead, the highest tip of the Jagurdwa rose above them all. "They're all yours," Yash said to his uncle. "A good group?" he asked out of earshot. "Pretty good, uncle," Yash replied. "Not too fit, but we've seen worse." They shared a laugh between them before the first of the group caught up and was slowly followed by the rest, who were sweating and breathing heavily. "Here we are," Yash announced, "your base camp for the evening. My uncle Ranj will lead you on the next part of your trek up the Jagurdwa first thing in the morning. Have a safe trip. I'll see you again in a couple of days." With that, Yash began to wander back down the beaten track towards the village. On the way, he detoured, as he often did, to visit the wise sage who lived in a remote spot on the mountainside. He had lived in the small wooden hut for as long as Yash could remember, and he supposed much longer than that. Everyone knew the sage. Children were taught about his sayings. Adults sought his advice for help on anything important. When the drought had withered all the villagers' crops, the sage had been there. When the river had burst its banks and destroyed many homes, the sage had been there. Each time the village needed guidance, to the sage was where the elders turned. Yash wondered if there was anything that the sage didn't know. He knew and kept even more of the mountain's secrets than Yash did, and his words always brought inspiration. Yash found Guru Aluko sitting silently in his rickety home, well hidden from the tourist trekking route. His wrinkly eyes were closed. Yash studied him silently for a moment. A few wisps of grey hair on his mostly smooth, bald head fluttered slightly in the breeze that billowed through the tiny cabin. Yash had no idea how old the sage was, and had never been brave enough to ask him. "Hello, Yashaswin." The voice startled Yash. "Hey, Chi, how did you know it was me?" "No one else tiptoes in at this time, and no one else calls me G." The sage opened one eye at a time, following this with a smile which spread slowly from cheek to cheek. His face glowed with kindness. Then, suddenly, his smile became a wicked grin. "Now, what have you brought me?" he asked, scouring Yash with searching eyes. Yash sighed and turned out his pockets. "Not much," he admitted. "A couple of boiled sweets and something called mint cake." He pulled out a handful of sweet treats donated to him by the past week's tourists. Unblinking, the sage reached out hungrily and took the meagre offerings. Turning each sweet over in his hands, he investigated them all with the innocent bliss of a child inspecting his marble collection. As Guru Aluko began to unwrap a mint humbug, Yash cleared his throat. "So, what's new, G?" Let's stop there and talk about our reading skill. Today we're looking at the structure of the writing. Do you know what structure is? Structure means the way that the author has built the text, like a builder building a house. There are many ways to write a story, and each one has a different effect on the reader. Let's have a look at page 5 as an example. Here it is. On this page, the author has introduced a new character, Guru Aluko. When an author creates a new character and introduces them for the first time, they have a choice to make. They can either stop the story and write a whole paragraph just describing that character, ready to start again. Or they can continue to write the story and hide clues about the character in it for the reader to find. What I'd like you to do is stop the video, have a look at page 5, and decide whether you think the author has stopped the story to describe the character, or whether the story continues and clues about the character are hidden inside. Pause the video now and have a think. Here we are, on page 5. These are the places where the author has described something about Guru Aluko. The author has decided not to stop the story to describe the sage, but has hidden clues in the story as it goes along for us to find. Some of the clues are very straightforward, like wrinkly eyes. The author has just put the word wrinkly inside the action to add some extra detail. Wrinkly tells us that the sage is old, without having to explain it to us properly. Some clues are more complicated. In the second paragraph, the author says that Yash has never been brave enough to ask how old the sage was. What impression does this give you about the sage? Pause the video now and write down what you think. Well done. I think that the sage is someone who Yash respects and doesn't want to be rude in front of. This suggests that he is someone who Yash really cares about the opinion of and doesn't want to upset him as he values his talks with him. You might have said that Yash is afraid of the sage, but I think if you read the rest of the page there aren't many other clues to suggest that the sage is a scary person. We have to use the clues in the rest of the page, like his face glowed with kindness and his innocent bliss at being given sweets. Why do you think the author chose to hide clues in the story like this while the characters are talking, instead of stopping to describe the sage all in one go? What effect does it have? Pause the video now and write down what you think. Well done. The reader needs to know all about the sage as we're meeting him for the first time, so it's important that he's described. But Yash has met the sage many times. Stopping the story to describe him would make it seem like Yash was learning all that information for the first time about the sage. The author has made it seem like Yash knows the sage well, but has managed to sneak in all the important information that we need. Let's keep reading. As usual, there wasn't anything new, but Yash was sure that there would still be a story to hear. He helped himself to a steaming mug of tea as a few lively flames licked at the bottom of a well-worn saucepan, precariously balanced over the fire near the entrance to the hut. The sound of the trickling stream nearby reminded Yash that almost everything the sage had, including this tea, came from the mountain. It was no wonder, thought Yash, that he was so fascinated by the sugary delicacies brought up the mountain by travellers. His was an uncomplicated lifestyle that many in the huge cities dreamed of, away from the noise and confusion of modern life. He tucked his legs underneath himself on a rough blanket as he sipped the warm drink. The wise sage spoke softly, sucking all the while on his boiled sweet, and they talked for a time. "Can you remember how old the mountain is?" Guru Oluko asked. "Millions of years. You've told me that before, you know." "It is true, Yashaswin. Millions of years of history lie beneath your feet." "But how did the mountain get here, G? Does anyone really know that?" "It is a good question to ask, Yashaswin. Ask a man of science, and he will tell you about the plates in the earth's crust colliding fiercely together, causing the land to buckle and rise." Yash complimented the sage's description by motioning with his outstretched hands, bringing his fingertips together and then pushing them upwards, adding sound effects for good measure. "But ask a man of spirituality, and he'll tell you of the gods fashioning a higher sacred place for the ancient people to become closer to their creators, a pathway to the heavens." So, which one is true? Many people believe different things, Yashaswin, but some things are certain. The mountain has both beauty and power. It is greater and older than us all, and it has an aura of majesty. It will take from you, but it will also give great rewards. Do not concern yourself with moving mountains, for the mountains will move you. Silently, Yash thought for a moment on the sage's words. Do not concern yourself with moving mountains, for the mountains will move you. It didn't seem to make any sense, and Yash gazed out across the drifting cloud shapes as his mind wandered, distracted by the views. In the distance, snowy peaks were attempting to edge higher than each other into the sky. The overlapping mountainsides sloped away, and even further below, the tops of the great trees looked tiny. "Oh no, look how low the sun is!" he blurted, jumping to his feet. "I have to go, otherwise I'll have a miserable herd of chouris wondering where their evening feed is." Smiling, Guru Aluko reached out one bony hand as he always did. He deposited a small parcel, wrapped in leaves and tied with string, into Yash's palm. "Take this to our friend on the way home, if you would, Yashaswin." Yash waved as he skipped away along the rocky path. That's the end of chapter 1. We've spoken about the structure of the writing. Now I'd like to talk to you about the presentation. What do you think of when you hear the word presentation? Presentation is what the text looks like on the page. I'm looking at page 7. On this page, I can see one paragraph that looks a little different to the rest. Can you find it? It's this one, paragraph 4. Do you know what this effect is called? If you do, pause the video now and write it down. Well done. This text effect is called italics. The author has used italics here and on page 1. Here it is in paragraph 5. What is the link between these bits of text? Pause the video now and write down why you think the author has used italics. Well done. In these paragraphs, the author is writing down Yash's thoughts. The italics show that this sentence is not part of the main story, but it isn't being said out loud either. Yash can hear these words, but only inside his head. Look how the italics stop halfway through the sentence. 12 years living at the base of this mountain, he thought to himself, compared with the 12 hours since you got off the plane. Here are some more of Yash's thoughts. Always be welcoming to friends, but be even more welcoming to visitors. Whose voice do you think Yash is hearing inside his head this time? That's the end of chapter 1. There are more questions and activities that you can do after the video. Just download the activity pack in the link in the description below. Join me next time for chapter 2, where we'll be discussing how to make comparisons between two characters. See you next time.